So, good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Great. This is exciting. Opening night of the 9th annual Wisconsin Science Festival. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Eric Wilcots, and I'm proud to be the co-chair of the Wisconsin Science Festival Steering Committee. So welcome. So this is the first night. We're getting underway for a full weekend of exciting events across the campus, across the city of Madison, and throughout the state. And we've got more than 335 events statewide. So there is something for absolutely everybody to engage in science this weekend with the Wisconsin Science Festival. You can find the full schedule at wisconsinsciencefest.org. And so you'll see the full list of things you can do. So I want to highlight a few of these that are coming up, particularly things that are coming up in this room in the next couple of days. So we have this event, Science in Entertainment and the Arts. Okay, that will be a panel discussion tomorrow at 2. I think the next one is our Friday night event. So the main events will move from this building to the square. We're going to take over the square downtown from 6 to 9 with nearly 36 events at your favorite haunts. We'll be doing some stargazing on the rooftop of the Parthenon. We have the science of chocolate at Kilwins. All about cheese. That's Wisconsin. All about cheese at For Imagination. And much more. I will actually be one of 2 scientists who walk into a bar at Rigby tomorrow at 6. I don't know what's going to happen after that. Somebody has to. Exactly right. And then our final event of the Science Festival here in this room is going to be Saturday night. We have Kyle Hill from Because Science, who will be talking about the science of Star Wars. So it should be a great event. Feel free to come in costume, or bring your lightsaber, or whatever you need. Okay, so I also want to take a moment, as we do here at the university, just to recognize that the university actually resides on the traditional lands of the Ho-Chunk people. And I think that's particularly appropriate given tonight's discussion about water in our state. And so we just want to recognize that and urge you to take advantage of some of the tours around campus and some of the recognition of the Ho-Chunk people for whom this land belongs. Okay. So now it is on. I got to thank the sponsors. We're not thanking the sponsors. So thank you, sponsors. We have some great sponsors: Line Energy, Wisconsin Public Radio, Public TV, Promega, our gold sponsors, silver sponsors. You see there: BMO Harris, American Family Insurance, Thermo Fisher, of course, foundations like the Alfred Sloan Foundation and the National Science Foundation, and then a number of bronze and corporate sponsors. This would not happen without the great generosity of all of our sponsors. So thank you. Okay. So now it's on with tonight's event. How many of you have been to one of these before? This is our 6th annual Big Ideas for Busy People. Okay. So many of you know the rules, but if you don't know the rules, we're going to go over the rules. Each presenter will get 5 minutes. I'm looking at our presenters. 5 minutes. If the clock reaches 0, and you see the clock over here, and it might happen to me, okay, then this will happen. Following that, the clock will reset back to 5 minutes, and we have 5 minutes for audience Q&A. After those 5 minutes are up, and we will repeat with the next speaker. Okay? So that's going to be the rules of the game. So it's going to be very fast. It should be a lot of fun. And so, but because we're going to be going from one speaker to the next, I will not have an opportunity to introduce the speakers in between their 5-minute sessions. So I would like to introduce them now so we know who's going to be speaking. So we have Todd Ambs from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Todd will be first. Todd and I actually played softball together years ago. Matt Ginder-Vogel from Civil and Environmental Engineering. Paul Hanson from the Center for Limnology. Leah Horowitz from the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. Steve Lohide from Civil and Environmental Engineering. Alex Rose from Blue Ring. Anita Thompson from Biological Systems Engineering. And last but not least, Jake van der Zanden from the Center for Limnology. So before we start, let's get all of our speakers a round of applause. And And with that, let's reset. The clock has already been reset. We'll get Todd fired up here. And so we'll begin tonight's big ideas for busy people with Todd Ambs. Todd.
Wisconsin, woven from a fabric drenched in water. 84,000 miles of rivers and streams, 15,000 lakes, over 5 million acres of wetlands. We have 800 miles of Great Lakes shoreline, 190 miles of Mississippi River shoreline, and enough groundwater that if it was laid evenly over the state, it would be 100 feet deep. We have amazing waters that provide great opportunities, but also present a fair list of challenges. And it begins with drinking water. So at the beginning of this year, when Governor Evers declared 2019 as the year of clean drinking water in Wisconsin, he did that because of a need that is simple, important, and compelling. For a variety of reasons, from a variety of sources, from a variety of locations, tens of thousands of people in this state can no longer turn on the tap and safely drink the water. We have to fix that. It's that simple. Our important work involves three main focus areas. PFAS, the first one. PFAS are a group of human-made chemicals used for decades in numerous products, including nonstick cookware, stain-resistant sprays, and certain types of firefighting foam. These legacy contaminants have made their way into the environment through spills and discharges of PFAS-containing materials. PFAS can persist in the environment and the human body for long periods of time. Exposure to some PFAS substances above certain levels increases the risk of adverse health effects, such as thyroid disease, low birth weights, and cancer. Since EPA has not established any federal standards for these contaminants, Wisconsin, like other states, is working to address this critical issue. We will be taking action next week at the DNR to begin the process of developing new strict limits on the amount of this chemical that can be present in our groundwater, surface water, and drinking water. Environmental toxicologists at the Wisconsin Department of Health Services have recommended a standard that, if approved, will be one of the strictest in the nation. Drinking water challenge number 2, nitrates and pathogens from fertilizers and manure spreading. We have problems across the state. Pathogens cause bacterial contamination, excess nitrates in drinking water cause a range of health problems, including blue baby syndrome. And state test results indicate that more than 80,000 private drinking water wells in Wisconsin have water that is unsafe to drink due to high nitrate levels. These problems are especially problematic in our state because nearly 1 in 3 Wisconsinites get their drinking water from private wells. And private wells are largely unregulated in our country. Wells must be put in according to well construction codes, but after that, you are largely on your own. That is why we are developing new rules to develop targeted performance standards in areas of Wisconsin that are most susceptible to nitrate contamination and where rural families are suffering most. Drinking water challenge number 3, lead service lines. No amount of lead is safe to ingest, and children exposed to lead can experience permanent brain damage. Currently, we have nearly 200,000 lead service lines in more than 125 communities that provide drinking water to homes, schools, and businesses. Local water utilities can treat the pipes to keep them safe in the short run, but the only true safe long-term solution is to get the lead out. And that takes money. So we are continuing to be creative in the use of federal drinking water funds that local communities can use to address the problem. And we will continue to seek funds from the state legislature to help local communities respond more quickly to threats posed by these pipes. It will not be easy, and it won't be cheap. Communities like Madison have already acted and have removed all of their lead service lines, but we have to give other less affluent communities in the state more resources to address this crisis. We must paddle forward together to achieve healthy waters for all of us. I'm convinced that we can do it because we are Wisconsinites. We understand the importance of our world-class water resources. It's the land of John Muir, Aldo Leopold, Gaylord Nelson. We have been at the forefront of everything from wastewater treatment to addressing the impacts of acid rain. And our groundwater quality law is 35 years old and still looked to as a model for the nation. And now, we must take bold actions to make sure that our water is always safe to drink, and so that these images remain the ones that we think of when we picture the waters of Wisconsin. Thank you.
With seconds to spare. Well done, Todd. Questions? We've got 5 minutes. Start the clock, please. Questions? Yes?
Well, the first challenge that we've got is finding out where it is. And so we are in the process of doing, requiring a lot of testing around the state, and what we're finding, unfortunately, particularly at military bases and near airports, is that we have high concentrations. In fact, we found some more that you'll be hearing about in the next couple of days. The challenge is, the good news is you can get out of the wastewater stream. The bad news is that then it goes into biosolids, and nobody's quite sure what to do with it then. But the only thing that we know for sure is that you can render it inert if you put it into an incinerator at very, very high temperatures. And I'm told we have about 5 of those in North America. So we have some challenges, but if nothing else, I hope that we would learn, I was talking about this earlier, maybe we can learn the larger lesson about this, that we really need to pay attention to the precautionary principle. We've been manufacturing these things for 70 years, we put them out in the market, and then 20, 30, 40 years later, we say, wonder if that's bad for the environment. Why do we keep doing that over and over?
Yeah, we have a question in the back. Then we'll get.
Hi, good presentation. Just a question about, another one about PFAS with fish. With all the people who fish and eat fish in this state, will there be testing of the PFAS in fish and advisories on eating fish like there are with mercury?
Yeah, good question, and we have already begun testing those fish. Some of those test results are going to be back literally in the matter of weeks. The unfortunate reality in a number of places, for instance, we've got challenges in Starkweather Creek, so we may have some issues in terms of the fish tissues of the fish that get into Lake Monona. Sadly, Lake Monona, we've already got health advisories due to mercury and other contaminants. The good news is that probably covers the PFAS contamination, and that's yet another reason why pregnant mothers, other folks shouldn't eat those fish. But yes, we are testing the fish throughout the state.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, again, on the relation in terms of bottled water, the good news is that we don't have, we do have a law on the books, been on the books since 2004, that basically makes it extremely difficult for bottled water companies to come in and bottle spring water for sale outside of a local area. So we already got that law on the books, but certainly we have some issues with other sorts of, not only bottling facilities, but other sorts of high cap wells and the impacts that it can have on groundwater resources. We've got some disappointing court cases out there and legislative actions that are, at least in some circles, suggesting that it's difficult to look at the cumulative impact of those wells. Something that this administration is already looking at a little bit differently. So there's a number of interesting challenges that we've been confronting being in the agency, but I can say that it's exciting to be back in the DNR with such great, talented science professionals.
Yep, one more.
The plastics industry is a big economic driver in Wisconsin.
Which industry, excuse me?
The plastics industry.
Plastics.
Plasticizers are going to be the next PFAS. Is the DNR doing anything preemptively to address plasticizers in our environment before it gets to be a recognized issue?
Yeah, there are. So there is a. there's a process that groundwater quality law that I spoke about before has been on the books since 1983. And that law, a very forward-looking one in the state, says that the DNR or Department of Agriculture can identify chemical compounds of concern, submit it to the Department of Health Services. Those toxicologists then look at it in an unbiased, peer-reviewed way. As an aside, we've had special interests complain that they don't get to have a say in the process, to which my response is, yes, that's correct. That's what the law says. You don't get to have a say.
And we got a gong. Thank you, Todd. Matt, you are up. We will reset the clock. Go 5 minutes.
So I wish I had known that Todd was going to introduce the 3 contaminants that we were concerned about in the state. Unfortunately, what I'm going to talk about is not one of the 3. I want to talk about trends in radium concentrations in groundwater throughout the state. In particular, this has been the work of a number of tremendous collaborators, so I want to make sure to acknowledge them up front. Florence Olson, who was working at the DNR and has now gone on to graduate school. Madeline Gokowitz, who was working at the Wisconsin State Geologic Survey and has moved out to Montana to work out there. And then up front here is Marie, who was a master's student with me, who also graduated, who did this work. So it used to be that we tried to drink water with radium in it. You can see you could buy certified radioactive water. It was a health tonic. It would help you feel better. It would also give you cancer and destroy your bones. But minor details, right? And so now we have limits on the amount of radium we're allowed to have in drinking water. And so these are kind of funny units. It's in total radium, and so there's 2 kinds of radium that commonly occur in groundwater. And this 5 picocuries per liter is a measure of radioactivity. And it ends up being a vanishingly small amount of radium, 10 to the minus 9 parts per million, for those of you that are into parts per million. And then there's other limits as well in gross alpha particles and uranium. And so if you've been following the news, the city of Waukesha had to go through a really long process to get approval to start getting their drinking water, hopefully at some point from Lake Michigan, instead of from groundwater. And it's not only Waukesha that is struggling with issues of high radium in groundwater systems, really throughout the state, whether you're out in the eastern part of the state or all the way up in the western part of the state. Throughout the entire state, there are municipalities that are struggling with radium in groundwater. And so the question I wanted to answer is, why are there so many cities in the state struggling with radium in the groundwater before they can send it out to their drinking water treatment systems? And how can we answer that question? And so by working both with the Department of Natural Resources that has routine water sampling, and so they collect data on the radium in groundwater from all the municipal wells. And then the Geologic and Natural History Survey, which has well construction records for all the municipal wells. We can combine these 2 sets of data and start to figure out, are wells from certain places in the groundwater system pulling up more radium than wells in other systems. And so we could combine this all down. We started with about 40,000 data points, got down to 2,000 data points, and then we could construct these maps looking at different regions of the state. And so what I'm showing you here is a gross average of a very large part of the state where a lot of people get drinking water from, and then the overall average radium concentrations in groundwater that comes up from these aquifers. And it should be noted, this isn't the concentration of radium going into the drinking water system. They have to treat and remove radium before it goes into the drinking water system. It's the amount in the groundwater itself. And so we definitely see a slight trend in both the far eastern part of the state and then also the central part of the state where radium has been increasing over the last 20 years or so. And we can look at this in more detail and see, right, if we average them out and we draw a line through them all, it is going up. And what's really interesting is that it depends on the spatial scale you look at this as to what's happening here. So the confined aquifer system is confined aquifer system is out here on the eastern part of the state and often experiences the most trouble with radium. And so we do see radium going up out there, although we see it going up a little bit slower in the unconfined region, which is out in the central part of the state and the rest of the state. But then you can also go in and look at actual municipalities using these data sets and see what's happening with the radium trends in municipalities. So if you look at the village of Sussex and village of Brookfield, you see a trend that is increasing to above the maximum contaminant level allowed by the EPA. If you look at Waukesha, you see a trend that is decreasing, but they still have many wells where the groundwater is far exceeding the radium concentration. And so even though that trend is going down, they're still really going to be struggling with radium in their groundwater. So overall, this is an example of how you can take advantage of regional data, geologic data, and then data you can obtain from the DNR and really start to understand factors that may be impacting groundwater quality and quantity in the state of Wisconsin.
Questions?
Hi, so not only radium, but other water quality parameters,
Yep.
when they're determined to have surpassed like a healthy limit, what are some of the upstream regulations to prevent those things getting into the water?
So radium is a naturally occurring contaminant. It is present throughout the entire aquifer system in our state. And so the big options are designing and constructing your wells to avoid areas where you might get water with high concentrations of radium. And actually, it's really one of the most pernicious things is avoiding these naturally occurring contaminants like radium, like uranium, like strontium. You know, there's a lot of things in the aquifer, in the groundwater, that you just have to deal with. And usually you deal with that with above ground treatment systems of various sorts to remove the contaminants.
What's the definition of a confined versus unconfined
yeah.
aquifer?
That's a great.
And does it follow some glacial pattern?
Yeah, it does. So in our state, out on the eastern part, we have a formation that's pretty deep called the Makokata Shale. That is a very thick, very dense layer of rock that water can't move through. And so the water beneath that is very isolated from surface impacts. And so that's what you call a confined aquifer. In the center part of the state, we have more of a regional or a regionally unconfined aquifer, but parts of it are confined, so it is kind of a mix of both. And so depending on where you go, some parts will be impacted by processes at the surface and other parts won't be as impacted. The reason it matters with this is the confined area tends to have very old water that has had a lot of time to interact with the rocks in the aquifer. And that's how it is often accumulating radium. And so that's why we see a trend on the eastern part of the state where there is this very old confined water that has had a lot of chance to interact with the rocks.
Yes, sir.
So can you say more about why the radium levels are going up?
No. We have some theories. I can't say anything for sure yet. One of the things we've discovered is that there is a very low level of radium present throughout the aquifer system that's well below the limit. But occasionally you find formations where you have a high level of radium that if you pull it into the well, then you'll exceed the radium limit. And so we're really trying to pin down. I have 3 graduate students working on this project right now, funded by the DNR, trying to figure this out and figure out how we can help municipalities avoid constructing wells that get water with high radium. Especially, Madison has the resources to deal with this, but if we think about smaller municipalities, looking at installing $1 million above ground radium removal system, for a town of 500, that's just impossible. So anything you can do ahead of time is what you need to do.
Other question, just in the back.
What about all those wells that are not municipal wells?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so fortunately, the water that has high radium is pretty deep. And so the wells that are getting water from deep in the aquifer tend to be the bigger municipal wells. We are working up by the Sheboygan area and up in that area of the state where there are some shallower wells that also have some water with high salt concentrations. And so that can be an issue as well. But the radium issue is mostly municipal wells.
Other questions? Yes, right. If
you have a private well, what can you do to remediate? The biggest thing is probably drill a shallower well, although then you'll end up in the same surface process impacted regime that Todd was talking about with the nitrate and agricultural waste. So I think it's a tough question. I think really if you're a homeowner and you have a really deep well with high radium, it's going to be a hard one to deal with.
Last question, real quick.
Is radium common all over the country?
It is common. So the aquifer system we've been looking at extends throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and so there's issues with radium all throughout the Midwest that gets groundwater from that system. There's also, I've seen issues, and it's a different kind of issue out in New Jersey, where they have some radium issues, and then also anywhere you have old water, oftentimes you can have radium issues. And it's become a real issue in fracking water that comes up from the surface.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, now on to our third speaker, Paul Hanson. The clock is reset. Stage is yours.
Wrong talk. Oh, okay, okay.
Ad living.
Unless you want me to give your talk.
We can try. We'll try that
No,
next
no.
year. Great, great. Alex Rose, the stage is yours.
Okay. Well, apparently that works. Okay, cool. Well, hi, I'm Alex. That's not me. I'm Alex. This is Clipperton, and I'm going to tell you about this place and how it kind of opened my eyes to plastic pollution. So you know how sometimes you're very aware that an issue exists, but you're sort of unaware of the magnitude of the problem until one specific experience just kind of smacks you awake? Well, for me, that was Clipperton. So this is the most remote atoll in the world. It takes 96 hours to get here from the coast of Mexico, and that's on a good day. So this is extremely far from anywhere. It's got a crazy history, too. I'm going to attempt to give you the history of Clipperton in about 60 seconds. So it was discovered in 1711 by two French guys, and they named it Ile de la Passion, or Passion Island, because it was discovered on Good Friday. Fast forward 100 years, nobody's calling it Passion Island, they're calling it Clipperton, and that's because a pirate by the name of John Clipperton used to use this place as a base for his raids and operations. Fast forward till 1906, and Mexico and the British East India Trading Company come to an agreement where they put 100 people on the island to mine guano. So yes, we started mining bird poop off the island for fertilizer. Well, crazy thing is, there is no potable water or arable land on this entire little island, so everything had to come from Mexico. So shipments of water and food came from Acapulco until the Mexican Revolution started, and suddenly these stopped. Well, when food and water stopped showing up, people started dying. So within the next 5 years, the population went from 100 to 14, 1 man and 13 women. He's a bad guy. His name is Victoriano Alvarez, and he calls himself the King of Clipperton and spends most of his days raping and torturing the women on the island. Delightful guy. Anyway, they don't tolerate this for very long. He gets bludgeoned by a couple rocks, and then rumor has it that one day later, a U.S. Navy ship shows up and rescues the last of the 13 people there. Bad timing on his part, I suppose. So, fast forward to World War II, the United States illegally lives here for about a year, 1944 to 1945, as a base of operations. After that, no humans come to Clipperton. All right, so here we are. Clipperton's gorgeous. It's very pretty from far away. It's got this nice picturesque little single palm tree where you could be sipping a drink underneath it. Well, it's also quite beautiful underwater. Clipperton, because it is so isolated, doesn't have a lot of diversity, but it does have a large biomass of fish, which is a pretty neat thing, and it's extremely healthy. It also has a resident population of 100,000 birds called the masked booby. It is the largest population of this bird anywhere on the planet. Unfortunately, this bird has to also share the island with loads and loads of plastic. So I showed up on Clipperton and spent 5 days there, and I was absolutely blown away by the magnitude of the plastic problem. So it's an atoll, it's a ringed island, and every single step I took on that 8 miles of island was covered in plastic. Everything from refrigerators down to microplastics. And this is the issue. A lot of times it's this small stuff that's the biggest problem because we're not seeing it. We're not seeing it show up in the food chain very easily. We have to be looking for this stuff, though. So we get microplastics. The sand is primarily plastic now, more than sand. And you get pictures like this with a bird facing off with a plastic water bottle. This is not something that we should be seeing, but it's actually more common for a bird to encounter a plastic bottle than it is for it to encounter another bird. And you also have this happen. We spent 5 days diving here and we collected almost 3 miles of discarded monofilament longline, all still with the fasteners and the clips and the weights and the hooks attached to them, not to mention the 2 ghost fishing nets that we also pulled up off the reef. These are just not things that should be happening, and we need to do better. We really need to start to realize the magnitude of our impacts on the planet. We need to start to realize that no matter where on Earth we live, every drop of water we drink, every breath we take connects us to the sea, and we're at the center of every one of these problems. Part of that is good because it means that since we created this issue, we are also uniquely capable of solving it. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that all of these daily actions by us really, really add up. It might seem small and trivial to say, no, I don't need a straw. No, I don't need that plastic bottle. No, I will bring my own bags. That seems small. But when 7.7 billion people say that, it's not small. It makes a huge difference. And everything we do contributes to this issue, whether it's positive or negative. Just for a number or a piece of reference, we dump, unintentionally mostly, about 8 million tons of trash into the ocean every single year. To try to imagine that, that is the equivalent of 19,000 Boeing 747s fully loaded with trash dumped into our ocean every single year. This is obviously not something we're doing intentionally, but it's this runaway cycle of our single-use plastic lifestyles that's getting us to this point. And we need to not just look to corporations to make these changes, which they do need to do, but we need to look to ourselves to make these changes in our daily lives and hopefully the lives of those around us so we can work together towards a bluer, better, more sustainable future. Thanks.
I'm fired up now.
It's almost like I rehearsed it.
You know, almost. Oh, all right, 5 minutes. Questions? Somebody's got to have a question. I'm going to ask Cecilia, what was on that last picture you showed? What was that?
Oh, that was a school of silver sides in Indonesia.
Okay.
Yep. A few million fish, no big deal. Yes?
Is there something unique about that location that the currents are going to gather the plastic?
Yes. Well, it is systemic and it is unique. I'll give you both. So Clipperton, because it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere, I mean, it's just in the middle of the ocean as far as we're concerned. It's surrounded by at least 2 of the major of the 5 plastic gyres around the ocean. So the world kind of has these cycles of plastic, these whirlpools of plastic that collect, and the biggest one is the giant Pacific garbage patch, and it's currently about a little bit bigger than the size of Texas. It's big. It's a big problem with lots of little stuff in it, and that's the issue. And these ocean currents do absolutely push things onto whatever happens to be around them, which in this case is this tiny island. But I'm not going to tell you that places that aren't like Clipperton also don't have the same problem. Almost every island nation that I've personally ever been to looks the same, and it's really, I mean, some places are doing an amazing job to try to mitigate that, but it's all coming from the ocean. You can only do so much. So,
yes.
By weight, what's more significant? Is it the microplastics in cosmetics and whatnot, or is it the larger things, plastic bottles and things like that we use?
Well, that's kind of hard to say. From the perspective of marine wildlife, the big stuff is probably a much bigger issue because you've got sperm whales and pilot whales and dolphins and all of these marine mammals and sea turtles that keep washing up dead on beaches, and all of them have one thing in common. It's their stomachs are completely filled with plastic. And this is becoming extremely common. Of the baby sea turtles that are found dead on beaches, 95% of them have plastic in their stomachs. So it's not necessarily that things that eat plastic can't survive. It's that they're eating it on such a scale that it prevents them from being able to digest any other food and they starve to death. As far as microplastics go, the thing that's the most dangerous about them is that we really don't know what their effects are. Obviously, this is just mainly from either cosmetics, like you said, or things, plastic breaking down. It photodegrades, so anytime plastic is exposed to sunlight and seawater, it breaks into smaller and smaller pieces. The issue with these smaller and smaller pieces is that they become more and more porous, and when things are porous, they act like a sponge, and they hold on to all these toxins. Every toxin in our environment gets sucked up and stuck onto plastic. So it's very hard to tweeze out the effects of microplastic consumption on smaller animals, because how do you tweeze out all of these different environmental factors and say It was the microplastics that were the problem. It's extremely difficult to do, and people are trying to figure out how to do that now so we can definitively say, yes, science says these are bad. We're working on it. Yes.
Yes.
How do we move past, okay, I'm not gonna use plastic straws anymore, pat myself on the
Right.
That's not gonna save the world. We've got the Costco and the IKEA. All of the packages are used up.
Yep. It's true. I mean, there are only so many things we can do on a daily basis. Choices we can make, things we can avoid. We can't avoid every store. We can't avoid every piece of plastic. That's just not how it works. Plastic is just too pervasive, and we need to. This is where government regulations really do come in to be useful, because if we can at least regulate plastic more so that it's economically better to use alternatives instead of plastic that we have, there need to be financial disincentives to making the wrong choice, whether that's for us or for companies. The solutions are out there. There are loads of alternatives, but they're just expensive. And we need the Starbuckses and the Costcos and the Targets of the world to either get behind or be forced to get behind using something better, because the solutions are out there. They're just more expensive, and we need them to kind of step up and make it cheaper for all of us so we can follow along.
Way in the back on the wall.
What are some of the alternatives besides like, a ceramic mug?
Oh, as far as actual plastic alternatives, there aren't loads of them that are available for us to purchase unless you look really far. But as far as different types of plastic, so many of these bioplastics obviously are greenwashed a bit, so they're not the solution. But in the meantime, they are a good alternative. There are ones made out of algae, there are ones made out of corn, there are ones made out of coconut husks, there are ones made out of sugarcane fiber. Like, there are tons of different ways that we can make plastic alternatives that are meant to biodegrade. Because my biggest issue with plastic is that we tend to look at it as this terrible thing, and plastic's incredible. Like, plastic as a material is spectacular, but we just manage to use it all for all of the wrong things, because it's meant to last for thousands of years, and we use it for stuff for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Perfect timing. Well done. I have no idea if we're in order. Whoever's next, come on up. Leah, you're up. Great.
Well, that was a hard act to follow, so thanks for that. And thanks to all the organizers for all their hard work and inviting me to speak today. And before I begin, I just wanted to follow up on what Eric was talking about and just acknowledge that the University of Wisconsin-Madison rests on the ancestral land of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And on the theme of water and the environment, the Ho-Chunk General Council about a year ago voted to amend its tribal constitution to give legal rights to nature, including bodies of water. So my title today is Water Justice, so I'm going to start off by defining what that means. You may have heard of the term environmental justice, right? And as you probably know, that concept points out that environmental harms are disproportionately targeted to people of color, people living in poverty. So water justice looks at the ways that clean water is often inaccessible or at risk, and particularly for vulnerable populations. Now, water is pretty fundamental to human survival, right? Without water, you and I would die in about a week. So access to any water at all is incredibly important. And guess what? That's not going to get better as climate change increases both droughts and flooding, and as glaciers recede and the ocean rises. Okay, so that's access. But dirty water can kill us too. And there are two ways that waters can be contaminated. One is that it can carry disease. And according to the World Health Organization, unsanitary water is actually one of the greatest threats to human health on the planet. It kills 1.7 million people every year. And look at where those deaths are happening, okay? Africa, right? India, places where people are already suffering from poverty. But what I want to focus on today, or at least in the 3 minutes that I have left, is another threat to clean water, which is pollution, and specifically industrial pollution, because industry is a big threat, like we've been hearing about, to clean water, whether it's by deliberately dumping waste products into it or by accidental spills of polluting substances. Now, up until recently, I did most of my field work in New Caledonia, which, as you can see here, is a little island nation in the South Pacific. And on this little island nation, there are already 3 nickel refineries, 2 of which have been recently constructed, one in the north and one in the south. And so the indigenous community members there are particularly worried about the impact of these refineries on their marine resources. Things like fish, crabs, giant clams, which can actually get a lot bigger than that one, sea cucumbers, because they rely on these resources for subsistence and livelihood. And both of these refineries are dumping effluent into the lagoon that surrounds the main island. So I was studying the actions of an indigenous protest group there called Hebunu. And this group won some important victories. For one thing, it convinced at least one of the mining companies to reduce the manganese concentration that it had in its effluent down to 1/100th of its original planned concentration it was going to dump in. And that reduction brought it into line with standards followed in Europe, water justice. Now, of course, these kinds of water justice issues aren't just happening in distant places like New Caledonia, right? They're happening right here at home, too. And so my research program is now turning to focus on community responses to oil pipelines in the U.S., including the Dakota Access Pipeline and Line 3, which runs through Manitoba and Canada, North Dakota, Minnesota, and ends up in our own Wisconsin. And so right now I'm focusing on ways that tribes and their allies can use formal legal systems in the US and Canada in order to protect their natural and cultural resources, things like water. So for instance, from a theoretical standpoint, I'm looking at ways that ideologies, power relations, and the law all can co-evolve to produce social change, such as greater indigenous rights, to protect their land and water. And in my, some of my empirical work is looking at community participation in permitting processes, specifically how that has played out at a state and federal level regarding DAPL, and also comparing what happened in North and South Dakota with what's happening in Line 3 in Minnesota. I have 4 seconds to spare.
We're doing fabulously. No gongs yet. Questions? Yep, right up here in front.
Okay, so now that it's become apparent that criminalization of pipeline protests is happening in more and more states, what is going to happen? Like, how do we get around this?
Yeah, good question. Any lawyers in the room? Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Some ridiculous number of these bills. Yeah, it's over. Yeah, it's really, and it's growing all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's scary. How do we get around that? Everybody get out and vote. You know, and vote for people who care about these kinds of issues, and don't let those kinds of bills get through. You know.
Question, yes, in the back. Yes.
Is the company still adhering to the manganese standards? Is anybody keeping watch on them?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I assume that they would. They actually, it was an interesting story. They actually went, they weren't required by law to do this, but because of the pressure from this protest group, they actually went and developed proprietary technology using their own money to develop this new technology that actually reduced that manganese concentration. You know, I mean, if they went through all that trouble, I hope that they're actually using it, right?
Question, yes. Right.
Could you give us a sense of some of the indigenous movements in our own state to protect the environment, particularly water? Something closer to home.
In Wisconsin. Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of fieldwork in Wisconsin. I guess, well, one of the ones that sticks out is what happened up at Bad River with the Pinocchio mine. That was a really interesting, that was like about back in sort of 2013 now, where they were planning to put in this GTAC, you may have heard of, this big iron mine up in the northern part of the state. And the Bad River tribe really got together, linked up with some environmentalists, and really made a big deal of that, and the company went away, at least for now. So there was that, and there's also the Crandon mine, which I probably won't have a huge amount of time to get into right now, but it's a really interesting story with Sokagan Ojibwe at Mole Lake, who successfully fought off this big mining project. This is back in, I think, the 90s. Late 90s, am I right on that? Yeah. So that's another really interesting story of environmental activism from Native communities in Wisconsin.
Yes, up front.
But I think also with the Dakota Access Pipeline, we're pressure on major financial institutions.
Yeah.
Backing. I mean, that helped to kind of some of them get away from that. But those other pipelines, especially from the pressure for protesting like that, unfortunately, different talks. And so the pressure
Absolutely. Yeah, and just another one that comes to mind is with line 3. Oh, and then there's line 5 actually, which is again Bad River, and they've said no. So it's this oil pipeline that runs through their reservation, and the company had easements from like 50 years ago, and they have now said, just I think in January 2017, I think it was, the tribe said, no, you can't continue to run that pipeline through our reservation, you're going to have to take it out. So now it's all, in litigation, et cetera, and they found a section of pipeline that was exposed, where it's supposed to be buried underground to keep it safe. So, they're very concerned about that, and they've said, no, you have to leave. You have to take your pipeline out of our reservation. So that's another one. With line 3, there was actually a lot of indigenous people who basically, protested that little bit that comes in and ends up in Superior, just crosses the border. It's a very short segment. It's already been built, but while it was being built, they were on there like chaining themselves to the equipment in this, nonviolent direct action against this pipeline construction. So yeah, I mean, there has been a lot. Kind of think of it.
All right, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Sharon, let's reset the clock. Steve, are you sure you're next?
Not for sure.
You're not for sure. Well, we'll do this by surprise. I think Steve is next.
Let's see. Yes, that's me. Hello, I'm Steve Lohide, and I'll be talking about hydrologic change. But first, I want to start with a concept that's at the core of water resource engineering, and that's stationarity. And this is the idea that natural systems, hydrologic systems or climate systems, fluctuate within an unchanging envelope of variability. And we use this to help design water infrastructure. So for instance, we look at historical observations of rain intensity, and we use that to design our stormwater systems. Or we look at historical observations of stream flow and use that to decide what might we reasonably expect for flood levels in the future. And that helps us to decide where we should build and where we shouldn't build. But we have a problem. Stationarity is dead. The climate is changing. And if you feel like it's been a little bit wetter in Madison in recent years, we see that it has been wetter. We have observations showing increased annual precipitation. And if you also feel like we see larger rain events more frequently, if you look at our precipitation events that are greater than 25 millimeters here in blue, or 50 millimeters in red, or 75 millimeters in orange, all of those are occurring more frequently in the last few decades than they used to. But it's not only climate change that we have. We also have changes in land use. And if we look here at the Yahara watershed, oops. Well, maybe no video here, unfortunately. We see urbanization in the Ohara watershed, as well as urbanization in the Pheasant Branch watershed. And if you look at the Pheasant Branch watershed, what we see is also a change in, oh, I think I bought it. Make this work. I'm using up all my time here. But there we go. Okay, so urbanization in this region, in here as well, and that's also changing hydrologic processes. So here we have the belt line, we have Pheasant Branch, and we look at these two, the North Branch and the South Branch, and they look bigger than normal, right? And we see Costco here, and it looks more underwater than normal. And so we might ask, what's causing these sorts of hydrologic changes here in Middleton? Is it land use change? Or is it climate? Or is it both? Oh my goodness. Oh no, now we're watching other things. Whoa. Okay. We've seen a 30% increase in urbanization in the watershed since about the mid-90s. And before that, we had a relatively stationary period. So how do we decide how much of this was from climate change and how much was from land use? Well, what we find is about 60% was from changing climate. There's a relatively constant change from land use in every year. There's also an increase in stream flow from climate in most years. Sometimes there's a decrease, and sometimes there's a really big increase. So that increases the variability. But it gets even more complicated than this. Changing land use is also changing climate. And so the built environment, our roads and our buildings, absorb and retain heat differently than the natural environment. And so that results in an urban heat island. That changes our hydrologic processes. Here in Madison, the growing season is longer in the urban area than it is out in rural areas. That changes water use. In addition, when moist air moves through the atmosphere and interacts with the urban heat island, there's an instability, and that moist air is launched into the atmosphere where it condenses and amplifies precipitation over our urban areas. And so we get bigger storms in urban areas. One way that we might be able to counteract both of these is intentional greening. Urban green infrastructure to both retain some of that water and to cause transpiration, which causes cooling and reduces that urban intensification of precipitation. 3 seconds left, even with difficulties.
Wow, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, request, if you have a question, please wait for the microphone so we can all hear the question. Questions? In the back. There's a microphone. That means the people with the microphones are going to be sprinting.
If people want to learn more about this topic in general, what would you suggest they read or look into?
Well, for instance, there's a lot of information about green infrastructure on EPA's website, and so you could start there. There's some nice case studies about where it's been implemented. A few cities, Milwaukee being one of them, are real leaders in green infrastructure. So you can also look at their Office of Sustainability and get some resources. MMSD has some resources available as well.
Great. Question? Yes, in the back.
We've heard from different climate change scientists that the rain events have intensified with climate change, but also we have heard that the rain events have become more intense and slower moving, resulting in like 12-hour rains instead of a 2-hour front going through. Is that also an effect that you're seeing as you analyze the meteorology?
Sure, it's both the intensity and the duration of the rainfalls that matter. And we are seeing mixed effects. Both, what I showed here was just the daily total of precipitation, but we're seeing those in both regards. And how we deal with those depends on the question, right? So getting water out of your streets and through your stormwater system, those are really short-scale time processes. If we think about flooding on our lakes, that's not the major intense rain periods, but it's actually rain over a period of several days that contributes to our lake flooding. So the question in terms of whether we really care about the intensity or the total volume depends on what the question we're trying to answer is.
Yep. I think so.
Couldn't the city require new sidewalks and new personal driveways to be permeable surfaces? I mean, around the Capitol Square, some of that sidewalk is permeable. Why don't we require that?
Sure. Well, lots of things can be controlled through zoning, and also lots of things can be managed even by homeowners' decisions. If you look around your lot, you can think about how much water is leaving my lot during a rain event. Are my downspouts spilling out onto my driveway, or are they directly connected to the storm system, or are they spilling out into my lawn where it might infiltrate? That water that infiltrates still might become stream flow locally, or it may be used by plants where it is transpired and causes a cooling effect to reduce the urban heat island. So yeah, some of this can be through zoning, encouraging permeable pavements, and some of it can be builders' decisions as well as homeowners' decisions.
Hey, yes, in the back.
So how much can we, I mean, like rain gardens and having our own trees, does that make a large scale difference, or is it we really need like bigger parks and dispersed large trees or something?
So the things that we do on our individual lots, or the water that we can treat with a small rain garden is relatively small, but the way that it has a huge effect is that we distribute it over a large part of our city or our municipality or our watershed. So those distributed stormwater treatment techniques have a big effect when they're done in a widespread manner.
Yes, in the back.
Has anybody looked at the interaction between the urban heat island and this massive corn crop that is surrounding us and, creating, as I understand in the Midwest, a regional lowering of temperature and increasing humidity?
Yeah, it's that interface between a highly transpiring surface and a non-transpiring surface that really causes the instability. So that's exactly what we're talking about. And the effects of an urban heat island are the opposite in dry areas where you really introduce irrigation, right? So a more arid landscape where you would have had very little transpiration, you start irrigating things and you actually can cool off the environment.
All right, thank you. Great timing. We think we're back to, no, Paul, sorry, no.
Oh, that's okay.
It's okay? Oh, wait.
Oh my God. It's all about Paul. It's all about Paul. That's what it is.
I think
Sorry.
Anita's up.
I'm buying him a
We'll
beer
get to
after
Paul. We really will.
Let's see.
Here's your remote.
Will that work? Thank you.
All right, Anita, it's all yours.
So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the impacts of urbanization, and this follows kind of nicely from Steve's talk, so there'll be a little bit of overlap with what he spoke about. Some fresh water, so I'm not going to touch groundwater. I'm only going to talk about surface water systems. So what is urbanization? It's one of two things. It's either the increasing footprint of urban areas or it's the increasing number of people who are living in urban areas. And from a hydrologic perspective, what this means is that we take a landscape that's very permeable, that can absorb and store a lot of water, and we transform it into one that can't. And the way that we do that is by putting in roads and buildings and parking lots and sidewalks, all of these which are impermeable to water. So what this means then is that as we move from that kind of more spongy landscape, one that can absorb and infiltrate a lot of water and generate very little runoff, to one on the other end of the spectrum that infiltrates very little water and generates a large amount of runoff. So what this means is that we've got greater volumes of runoff flowing up the landscape. We've got higher flow rates. We've got increased flashiness of the system, which means the increase, how quickly it increases and decreases, and decreased base flow conditions. And all of these have physical, biological, and chemical impacts downstream. As impervious surface cover at a watershed increases, stream integrity generally decreases, and 10% impervious has been recognized as a threshold where we have changes in stream morphology that start to affect habitat. Greater than about 25 to 30%, we see really big impacts, less bank stabilization, less connectivity between the stream and the floodplain, decreased water quality, and very little habitat. We can't have urbanization without construction, and construction sites are a major source of erosion and sediment losses to receiving waters. Sediment on its own is a pollutant just by its volume. It takes up space in water bodies, but it also carries things with it like phosphorus and other chemicals that can absorb to it. Increased frequency and severity of flooding is another impact of urbanization. And Steve spoke about the urban heat island, another impact that's associated with that. Pavements and impervious surfaces can absorb and store a lot of heat energy. During a rainfall runoff event, that heat energy gets transferred to the runoff. And if that runoff is entering something like a cold water trout stream, it can be detrimental to things like brown trout that have very specific temperature preferences and tolerances. So we've done a lot of things, we've done a lot of things to mitigate the impacts of urbanization. And over the past several decades, there's really been a paradigm shift in how we've managed stormwater and runoff. So early on, the goal was to convey the water offsite as quickly as possible, get it downstream, mitigate the impacts, typically in some kind of a stormwater pond, that are really good at reducing peak flow rates, but they're not that good at doing volume control or infiltrating water. So we've moved from more end-of-pipe systems to more distributed systems, where the goal here is to provide opportunities in the watershed to allow more infiltration, let water move into the ground, percolate through the soil, and decrease the amount of runoff that's generated. At the site scale, erosion control practices are really important for reducing erosion and soil losses in urban areas. Erosion control practices on the left are designed to keep soil in its place. Once soil moves, it becomes sediment. And then we have sediment control practices that are used. And the primary function there is to allow time for sediment to settle out of suspension. There's also been an emphasis on conservation developments. So preserving natural areas and open spaces as part of a development. Clustering houses to minimize the impervious footprint, all in an attempt to minimize to mimic the pre-development hydrology of the system.
Ooh,
there you go.
Wow.
Someone can ask me about thermally sensitive areas, and then I can finish.
You're sneaking it now. That's cheating. All right, do you have questions? Yes, over here. Bring your microphone. Oh, wait for the microphone. Microphone's there. Yep.
Please tell us about the thermally sensitive areas.
Oh.
Thank you for asking about the thermally sensitive areas. So a lot of the impacts that I talked about, or a lot of the mitigation efforts that I talked about, they're really good at mitigating the physical impacts of the increased runoff volume, but they also can translate to biological impacts. So the more water that can move through the ground and discharge into streams, that water temperature will be cooler. And the cooler the temperature of those streams, the better it is for things like trout. In Dane County, they've identified what are called thermally sensitive areas. So in that figure in the lower right, those are all of the places that are highlighted in yellow. And those are areas that are draining into cold water trout streams. So any development that goes into those areas, in addition to meeting the regular stormwater regulations, also has to make provisions for if there are increases in runoff temperature as a result of development, for putting in practices that will reduce the runoff temperature.
Other questions? Yes. Wait. Get away from the microphone.
Urban areas. Is there any evidence of a true urban site? Downtown Milwaukee, downtown Chicago. What do you do there? Roof gardens, I would guess, won't cut it.
I don't think they'll cut it. I mean, it's really very challenging when you've got a very highly urbanized area. There aren't that many opportunities for retrofitting and getting those things in. So like Steve mentioned, the more green, the better. But in a lot of areas where they're covered with concrete, it's really hard to do that.
Yes, over here.
What about the cooling effect of solar panels on urbanization? You could put a lot of solar panels in urban areas.
The cooling effect of solar panels? I really don't know much about solar panels. So I'm not going to be able to give you an answer, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just to add one missing piece to this, one of the reasons that Milwaukee is such a leader in this sort of thing, Milwaukee has what's known as a combined sewer system. Their street runoff and their sanitary runoff all go into the same system. It's a freaking mess. And trying to deal with it has made Milwaukee a leader in water technologies.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Thank you. I'm going to give you hop in the back over there.
So a lot of the solutions that you and other presenters have been talking about call on an individual. What are some of the ways that you've seen this kind of information disseminated amongst the public that you're really excited about?
Can you repeat just the last part?
What are some of the methods or ways that you've seen this kind of information be disseminated to the public that you're excited about, that you think are going to be effective?
I think just really increasing awareness, allowing people the opportunity to get a better understanding of what the impacts are and what some of the solutions are, and how on a cumulative, maybe on a site scale. And actually, let me back up a little bit. So a lot of these practices are very effective at the small site scale. I think one of the missing pieces is when development goes in, a lot of times we manage just at the development scale, but really getting an understanding of how to manage multiple developments within a watershed and how those interact with each other is really important. So I don't think I really answered your question, but I think that's also one of the missing pieces when we talk about residential development and urban development. We tend to look, in a very small area sometimes, and I think it's very important to focus in at the larger watershed scale and manage at the watershed scale as opposed to the site scale.
We have time for one last quick question. Yes. Wait, get the mic is coming. The mic is coming.
Chicago, about 10 years ago, they completed a deep tunnel project which cost billions and billions of dollars so that they could store billions and billions of gallons of runoff and so forth and process it slowly into Lake Michigan, because that's where their drinking water comes from. Have you heard any results of that project? It seems like it's fallen off the end of the earth as far as...
I have not heard results, no.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Paul, you are a confident man. You are a really confident man. Oh, there we go.
The clicker's up here. That's me. Okay, really quickly, who knows what limnology means? Please raise your hand. Oh, fantastic. Wow, I think, Jake, the job is done here. I'm a limnologist. Limnology is the study of inland bodies of waters, lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, all the physics, chemistry, and biology that goes into it. My area of expertise is water quality. I think, and I'm going to talk about lakes today, lakes and reservoirs. I think we all appreciate, sort of the services that lakes provide to us, especially for those lakes that are close by and near and dear to our hearts, right? And I think and that includes the lakes here in Madison, the beautiful lakes that are all throughout Wisconsin. And I think we also recognize the role that lakes play as we get to a little bit broader scales, like to the state, to the region, to the U.S., for fish and fisheries and biodiversity and all the different services that have been talked about already. What I think is a little bit more challenging to understand is the global scale and how lakes are important to what happens with the planet. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about 3 examples today. I think 3 examples that maybe weren't very apparent to me, at least when I first looked into this, and probably haven't occurred to most of you. And I'm going to leave you with 3 big questions too that go along with it. So the first is that lakes and reservoirs play an important role in the global carbon cycle and in climate change. One of the ways in which carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere is through the growth of plants. And some of that plant material dies and stays in the organic carbon pool that's in the terrestrial biosphere. For growth, you need water. And if you look up here at the map, you see where the water is in the world based on the blue that's on the figure. It's in the northern part of North America, in Russia, in the boreal zone of Russia, and also South America and Central Africa have key parts too. And if we overlay the organic carbon that's been measured in the terrestrial biosphere, we see it maps on to those regions of the globe. We have organic carbon stored where there's water. Now imagine that, especially in the northern latitudes, that organic carbon is like a great pack of walleye fillets that are frozen in your freezer, all wrapped up. And if you want to reverse that process of the storage of that organic carbon from your freezer, what do? You take it out, you warm it up, you open the package so oxygen can get to it, you put it out in the sunlight, and you'd add water to it to make sure the microbes can eat it up. That's exactly what's happening in northern latitudes. As the planet warms, ice and snow is retreating. That organic carbon that's stored is being exposed to the atmosphere and can be turned back into carbon dioxide. So the first big question is, what does that really mean for CO2 processing and carbon processing in general for the planet? So the second big issue has to do with global economies. Global economies are supported by and support global food networks. To grow food, we need water. The diagram that you see up here is the water that's required to produce that food that gets shipped all over the world. This is called a virtual water network. And it's really quite startling. 22% of the water that's used in agriculture goes into this international network. So the demands for food that are placed by Japan, for example, and China and Mexico and Canada are supplied in part by growing crops and using water that's in North America. And imagine now that we have to increase our population, or our population is going to increase by perhaps as much as about 50%. Where is that going to come from? It's going to come from food in part that's produced in the US and in Wisconsin. And that's going to put demands on our water supply. Wisconsin exports about $3.5 billion in agricultural products. This is big business. It's going to have an impact on us. And the third and final area I want to talk about is that human infrastructure grows up around water. We build around lakes, we build around reservoirs. So what you see up here is a figure. I want you to focus on the blue and the yellow dots. The blue dots are dams produced around the world before 1986. And the yellow dots are dams that were recently produced but haven't yet been cataloged. They've been detected by computer scientists looking at satellite remote sensing images. And if you see where the reservoirs are popping up all over the world, they're in places with big human populations that have big water problems. And we are going to have to face those water problems with folks around the world. The solutions to these problems are going to play out over the next few decades. And the people who are going to have to confront those solutions are the young scientists who are going to show up over the course of the next week and enjoy the kind of science that's going on here. Thank you.
Well worth the wait. Thank you, Paul. Questions?
What's the significance on that graph between reported and unreported reservoirs?
Right. So this is a topic, a general topic that doesn't have to do just with reservoirs, but for dams it's important as well. And so this is part of a larger project where we're trying to understand changes in surface water all over the planet. And a really cool example is one in which the production of palm oil is highly, highly regulated, okay? And we can use satellite remote sensing to detect changes in water use and changes in terrestrial land cover that's not being reported. That's part of the regulatory process. Also, just changes in surface water in general throughout the planet. We don't have a good grasp of why they're changed at a regional scale and how the human infrastructure needs map onto those kinds of changes.
Other questions? I have one, your plot of the trade,
Yeah.
which was basically the water content or the water needed to produce the goods that get traded. How does that then compare to a map of natural rainfall and places that accumulate water naturally?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know the answer to the question, unfortunately. But I think what we can do is we can map it onto the water quality. Typically, in order to produce crops, of course, you have to have water that's available. But there are arid regions that are really great for growing crops but don't have water. And the Central Valley of California is a really good example of that. And so, in addition to moving crops around the world, we do sometimes move water around the world. And in places like Australia, for example, that have undergone severe drought, especially about a decade ago, trading water rights is big business and a big issue, for sure.
Questions? Yes. Oh, Mike is coming, I think.
Talk about lakes, but is there a possibility that the oceans will be part of the water assets in the future? You look at Saudi Arabia and other places where massive desalination plants are supplying water. Is that fit in at all to some of the considerations that you're talking about?
Yeah, no question. It's a money and energy issue. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to desalinate water. And again, going back to Australia, which was a great example, when they were under their drought, they started building a number of desalination plants and spent billions of dollars in doing this. And then the rains came and they never turned the plants on. And so it's a great example of how one of the big issues with changing climate is that it's not just that the water cycle is changing a little bit. I mean, there's still water out there. It's where is the water and when is the water occurring where we need it? Do we have it where we need it? It's kind of the big issue. And as we use water, what's the quality of the water when it comes out the other side? That's one of the big issues with the global economy and how it relates to the availability of water. As we move water through manufacturing and agricultural systems, we tend to degrade the water quality. And so as production goes up, water quality goes down.
Okay. Oh, wait, we have another question. One more.
Have you seen maps of how cattle, for example, how much water is being used to raise cattle, and also the textile industries and their usage of water?
Well, unfortunately, I can't address that directly, but cattle do require a lot of water. I think it's one of the most fun things to do, and you can find this in a number of places online, is look at the water footprint of the different products that we produce, especially when it comes to things we consume. And what you might guess has the biggest water water footprint, which are things like chocolate, beef. Let's see, a few others aren't coming to mind, but the further we get away from grains, fruits, and vegetables, more expensive it is in terms of water.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and I think our last big idea comes from Jake Van der Zanden.
All right. Well, great. Thank you. I want to thank our speakers who have given a wide range of talks on a number of topics that are of global import relating to sustainability and our water resources around the world. And I want to close with a topic and a question that I'm sure is on all of your minds, and it sort of transcends everything we've talked about, which is, who has more lakes? Wisconsin or Minnesota? This is serious business, folks. This has actually blown up in the news, in the media, in the last several months. There have been blog posts and newspaper articles about this topic, this friendly war over who has more lakes. And the way I view it, this question is incredibly simple. The state of Minnesota has laid down very clearly how many lakes they have on their license plate. Right? It's very clear, 10,000 lakes. And if you go to Wisconsin's license plate and you look there for a source of information, you don't find any information about how many lakes we have. But fortunately, we can address this issue and ask the question, does the state of Wisconsin have more than 10,000 lakes? And there's a great source for this. It's called Wikipedia. And this source of information states clearly that there are 15,074 documented lakes in the state of Wisconsin. This fact is correct. This is the official count of lakes for the state of Wisconsin, right, Todd? From the Department of Natural Resources. So from this, it's pretty straightforward and the matter is settled, right? Well, all of this blew up in May of 2019 when Sarah Meany, who is the Wisconsin Secretary of Tourism, went on a Milwaukee radio show and stated, Wisconsin, many people may not be aware, actually has 15,000 freshwater lakes, more than Minnesota. And then she followed this up with, absolutely, we win, we win. Okay? So, yeah. This was followed up by an evaluation by PolitiFact, which rated this statement false. Okay? This is where the controversy is coming in. And an article from the biased Minneapolis Star Tribune saying that Wisconsin claims it has more lakes than Minnesota. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Okay, so this is really getting intense and the rivalry is ramping up here. This begs the question of fundamentally what is a lake anyway? And myself and my limnologist colleagues, you know what limnologist is now because Paul brought that up, we've discussed that at lunch and the group of us could not settle on a definition of what a lake was. We had all sorts of different ideas, but there was no resolution. And the reality is that there is no set definition for what a lake is. And given that, how can we move forward and resolve this pressing matter? Well, there are ways we can dig deeper into the data, and there's a lot of data out there on lakes, and so let's dig in, but recognizing that there's more than one way of defining what a lake is. So if we go to the official number of lakes from the DNR, Wisconsin wins with its 15,000 versus about 12,000. All right. If you go to, but I will note that Wisconsin and Minnesota have different definitions of lakes. Minnesota uses 10 acres as a cutoff, and Wisconsin is more inclusive in their definition. Okay. All right, the U.S. Geological Survey has this big national data set of water bodies, and if you actually look in that data set for all of the lake-like water bodies, Minnesota wins. If you take that same data set and you say you want lakes just greater than 10 acres, Minnesota also wins by a factor of about 2. If you look at lakes greater than 25 acres, again, Minnesota wins. So they're kind of pulling out in the lead here, 3-1. But if we look at who has the deepest lake, we have the deepest lake with Green Lake. And if you ask who has the greatest number of Great Lakes, we have double the number of Great Lakes than Minnesota. So given all this, I have designed 2 new license plates for the states. I want to roll those out and introduce those to you now. Introducing Minnesota's new license plate. All right? I think this is going to work. And finally, Wisconsin's new license plate. Okay. Now these are proposed. We'll see how far they go. But the reality is, and I think something we can all agree on, is that Minnesota and Wisconsin are two remarkable states that are blessed with an amazing abundance and diversity of lakes. And these lakes make life in this part of the world wonderful. And I think, we've heard a lot of really hard, challenging sustainability issues over the course of the night, but we also need to remember that these lakes and our aquatic resources make life special, particularly in this part of the world. And that's it.
All right. Can any state beat either Minnesota or Wisconsin?
Oh, don't even ask. Don't say the word Alaska.
I didn't say the word.
Alaska has 3 million lakes.
Okay.
So just to put that in perspective.
But that doesn't count.
Ontario has 250,000 lakes. So, yeah. But we don't want to get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just questions? Only if you're from Minnesota. No, questions.
I just want to know why is Green Lake so deep?
It's a glacial lake, and as the glaciers were retreating, they carved out a big divot. Glaciers do amazing things to the landscape, and you ended up getting a nice deep carve there for whatever reason. So.
Yes.
Oh, it's my daughter. Hi, Kira.
How deep is Green Lake?
Green Lake is, I don't know the exact depth, that's a really good question, around 250 feet, somewhere in that ballpark. So it's an incredibly deep lake, although certainly not one of the deepest lakes in the world, but the deepest in Wisconsin.
Which state has more of its surface area covered by fresh water?
Well, now we're talking just lakes, we're not including wetlands. If you just look at lakes, inland lakes, Minnesota wins. If we were to include the surface area of the Great Lakes that are within what we would consider the boundaries of Wisconsin, then you can make an argument that Wisconsin has more. So a lot of this does come down to how you do the math. Do we include the Great Lakes in there or not, and how much of them? Certainly in Wisconsin, we do have more Great Lakes shoreline than Minnesota, as I pointed out.
Yes, in the back.
What's your favorite lake?
My favorite lake. I'd have to just, go close to home, Lake Monona. I live near it. I see it every day. I enjoy it. It has its issues. We have a lot of water quality problems, PFAS, blue-green algae blooms, but it's the lake that I connect to on a daily basis. So.
Someone told me this fact, and I could not find it verified online, but they said that Wisconsin had, in one area, the second densest concentration of lakes in the world. Is that true?
The Northern Highlands Lake District in northern Wisconsin, that's Vilas and Oneida counties, Iron County, Forest County, is considered one of the highest concentrations of lakes in the world. Again, it gets a bit dicey if you're really trying to say it is the highest, because there are probably areas in Canada that have similar densities. But that region is exceptionally high in terms of its density of lakes. So I think, second highest, it may be, so.
Which state has the largest freshwater economy?
Oh, wow, that has nothing to do with lakes per se. It very well may be just California because it has the largest economy. And I would think that freshwater economies probably scale with overall economies, but I don't know for sure. Good question, though.
Yes, question over here.
So you said there's no agreement on what is a lake, but what's the difference between a pond and a lake?
Well, that's fundamentally what our question was. When is it small enough to be a pond versus a lake? When we were talking about this over lunch, maybe it's like, can you throw a rock all the way across it? That might be one. One might be, one that people will commonly cite is there a wave-swept shore? Ponds usually don't have waves, and they're not large enough to sort of have wave-swept shores. And so that might be a definition. 10 acres is one that the state of Minnesota uses. One might be, are there parts of the lake, is the lake deep enough so that there are parts that don't get light hitting them? because ponds usually have light going to the bottom and there's aquatic plants. So these are all different ways that you could define the difference between a lake and a pond. And of course, there are puddles, but if you wanted to call puddles lakes too, you probably could. So.
Yes, in the back.
Does the University of Minnesota have a Center for Limnology?
They don't. All right, enough said.
And I think that's a great way to end. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Appreciate it. We'll say enjoy the rest of the Science Festival. Lots of great events, and we'll see you around here or down at the square tomorrow night. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.